Episode 30, Bali Eco Lodge, a modern paradise, thriving seamlessly with nature.
Welcome to Thriving with Nature, a podcast that gives you the tools you need to live a modern lifestyle that helps regenerate our planet. And now your host, Hayley Weatherburn.
Welcome, Thrivers, to this week's podcast. I have a very special guest today, and we're in a special location. We are at Bali Eco Lodge with Norm. Welcome, Norm, to the Thriving with Nature podcast.
Hi, Hayley. Thanks for having me.
Today, we're going to be talking all things thriving with nature, as you all know, on this podcast. And there's no better place on this planet I think I've been to than Bali Eco Lodge. Saranbuana, am I saying it correctly? Yeah, Saranbuana. I first came up here in January and I was so impressed by the integration of nature, living a modern lifestyle, local community all together. And so I'm very blessed to have Norm today to talk about how he and his wife and family made this beautiful place. So I guess the first thing is, can you introduce yourself a little bit, Norm, and just sort of how did you come about being here in Bali?
Hi. Okay. Thanks, Hayley. Norm's my name. I was born in Sydney. At a pretty young age, I left Sydney. I was a teenager. Mm-hmm. I left Sydney and moved up to far north Queensland. Didn't like living in the city very much. Spent many years living and working in North Queensland, far north of Australia. Always looking for somewhere. I had a fantasy, a dream about a little house in paradise somewhere. Mm-hmm. And although there are a lot of beautiful places in Australia, it's always still Australia, the politics and the so on. Yeah. So I figured that wasn't going to be it. And after a couple of visits to Bali, staying with families here, I decided that Bali would be the place I'd like to have my house. This was about 30 years ago. Mm. And so I went looking for land. Cutting a long story short, was brought up here by a nice man, did a deal with several generations of the landowners here, which was maybe indicative. It's worth mentioning because they said to me, there was an issue of how much I'd pay, but they also said there's a couple of conditions. One is that because this is a special place to us, you mustn't ever bring anything bad here. Mm. And the second thing was, we know you, we have a relationship with you. It was via family. And so we would rather you don't ever sell the place. Mm. And I was really chuffed because in the West, you talk money and contracts and whatever, but nobody ever says to you, don't bring anything bad here because it's a special place to us. Yeah. So I went away, came back the next year and built this house we're sitting in, which is about 30 years ago. In that time, there was no electricity here. The nearest white person was 45 minutes away down on the coast. So it was very remote. The road was really broken, motorbikes or four-wheel drive. Mm. And it was amazing. I have to say it was one of the best things I ever did. It changed my life. I would go back overseas and I'd work and I'd get frustrated and a bit stressy. And then I'd come here for a couple of months and chill and relax and get, it's a big difference between living in a place where you're not conscious of the constant judgment that you feel in the West. Mm. Are my clothes right? Is my car nice? Are my teeth straight? Whatever, Mm. Built the house and had a few lovely years of coming back and forth. And then married Linda. We had a few years in Australia, but then same story, really got frustrated with the difficulty of doing good works and just living in a society that seems to be so hard to get good things done. And so we shifted over here permanently at that point. That was 20 years ago. Yep. And we've been living here ever since. Our boys grew up here. And just to expand on what you said before, I think as a parent, it was, again, one of the best things we ever did because, they grew up with the benefits of Western society, satellite TV, internet, travel overseas, and a decent schooling curriculum. They were homeschooled, but we used an Australian curriculum. But at the same time, they grew up in a village. So they learnt that the world doesn't revolve around them entirely and that they have responsibilities to family and to the community, a few old-fashioned values, respecting older people and just being polite in general. Realizing that not everybody has what we have, and being respectful of that. And of course learning a couple of extra languages. They both learned Indonesian and Balinese from an early age. So we've now got these two grown men who've been here with us since the pandemic started, who are really nice. They're well-rounded, they've travelled a lot, they know all about the modern world, they've had a good education, but they also have grown up integrated in a village community. Doesn't have to be in Bali, by the way. I just think that anywhere where a village is intact, it has these values implicit that are just better for kids to grow up in. There's that old saying about it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
When they were young and we were living in hippie land in Australia, it was very nice. There was a lot of rainbows and swimming in creeks. But when we came here and the boys were still young, it was a revelation. It was like, that's what it means, this thing about the village raising a child. You turn around and go, where are the kids? You have no idea. But someone's taken them off somewhere, or that people in general are keeping an eye on them. So they had an amazing amount of freedom when they were growing up. When they got a little older, the eldest got a mini bike, and after that they would finish their schooling, which, because they were getting focused attention, finished at 12, so they did half a day for a full day's work, but half a day. So they have lunch and then they disappear, and someone would say, where's the kids? You go, out there somewhere, the little one on the back, which you couldn't do in a Western society. And I think this is a really important point. I grew up in a very safe suburb in Sydney, but I've heard from people that's still there that nowadays nobody lets their kids walk to school anymore. I used to walk to school. I had a choice. I could catch a bus or I could walk to school. And I often chose to walk. It was a mile in the old measure. And it was nice. There was dogs along the way to pat and so on. But nowadays, even though that suburb is insanely safe, those people are not letting their kids walk to school. And I wonder what it does to a kid's mentality to grow up where they don't feel safe in their own home environment. The contrast here is that, they'd be out there somewhere. Lars was probably 11 or so, and Oscar is 7, 8. And we genuinely had no idea where they were half the time. But you're in a village community, you feel safe with that. Everybody's takes responsibility for kids. And so, I think it's had a big impact on them growing up. And I do worry about kids in the West with this thing of, wow, do they not feel safe? I did when I grew up. We hadn't developed this chronic panic fear of pedophiles and all the rest of it. So I did feel pretty safe in my environment. But things seem to have changed now. So, okay, that's basically the story. They were homeschooled. For a long time, Linda was here with the boys, and I would commute down to Kuta and over to Ubud to do consulting work and projects. Then that got really just too hard because it's far away. And then I spent a couple of years in reconstruction after the tsunami in Sumatra, so I'd be there a lot and home a lot and there a lot and home a lot, and that's a whole other story. But after that, or during that period, we decided to open the lodge, because really we needed an income without me being away all the time or commuting all the time. And that's just been a really nice success story. It was really just an expansion of our own lifestyle. Wherever we lived previously and here, we always had compost piles and we always had veggie gardens, and we didn't use pesticides, and it was just lifestyle stuff. That's how we lived. So then it became not so difficult to make that bigger. The compost's bigger, the gardens are bigger, when we started running the lodge, So, lots of people sort of go, oh gosh, that's really wonderful what you're doing, and, it must be hard, you guys are experts. And it's not really, it's just a lifestyle choice. You choose to pick up a can of pesticide, or you choose to find another way to manage the pests. You don't have to live with them, there's other ways of doing it, but this idea of just spraying things, or, trying to sterilize or poison your way to health and comfort, we never liked. And so it's the same here at the lodge. So fast forward to now, that's pretty much where we are. The lodge has been a great business, and it's benefited the community and it's benefited the environment here. One simple, perhaps the simplest demonstration I can think of for that is on the environment side, is when I first got here, there was a lot of bird catching going on. It was sort of part of life, way to make money, you know.
Right. Is that for the cages that they have here in Bali?
Yeah. So they'd catch them wild here and then sell them in the markets.
Yeah.
And so when I first built this house, there were very few birds here remaining. And I remember the first time some bird catchers came on the land, and I told them, no, sorry, you can't do that here anymore. And my landowner was a bit puzzled. He said, why'd you do that? And I'm like, nah, dude, we don't like it. Sorry, but on the land that I'm sitting on, I just don't want that to happen anymore. And now you fast forward 30 odd years, and there are heaps of birds here now, not entirely because of us, but partially. Certainly the biggest concentration and variety of birds is around the Eco Lodge here, because it's the safest. There's a lot less people catching birds because awareness has changed, but also that whole idea of, if you can create work for people by bringing guests to come and experience nature and look at birds, then you reduce the incentive for them to catch birds or do things that are bad for nature. So that's worked out really well. In terms of the community, there's probably too many things to talk about now, but there's always stuff that we're doing over the years to try and support the community and bring it on. I suppose a couple of random ones. There was a young man here, a friend of our boys. When he was very young, he was very clear he wanted to be an architect. His dad's a carpenter and didn't have the money to send him to uni. So because this kid was very clear about what he wanted to do, we paid for his university fees, which is not crazy expensive here. And he's now a successful architect. He worked with me on a few projects while he was studying. In fact, to the extent that his professor, towards the end of his course, told him he didn't have to finish his course because he already had a portfolio of projects working with me, and he was smart. And so he sort of said, look, off you go, you're done, enough. And he's become a successful architect. He's doing really well. So that was one. Another thing that we really like is we like football, or for some people, soccer. So when our boys were young, we got involved over in the village school, fixed up the field a bit, and our eldest son became their first coach, and so he was coaching the school kids and ours. And that evolved over the years so that we've never stopped doing that. We still keep the grounds in decent condition, and we pay for a coach so that these kids who are up in a farming village in the middle of nowhere have a bit of a chance to progress. And apart from all the health benefits and the social benefits of sport and so on, it turned out that first generation went on to become really good, so that our village football has got a reputation. And a couple of them have ended up playing in senior teams here for the region. So that's a really nice thing. There's other stuff. It goes on and on a bit too much probably, but and probably the central thing is just creating employment, stable employment in a place that treats people properly. You know, there's been some health stuff, where we've helped people with operations and health issues and so on. And that's just an ongoing process. So there you go. That's a long introduction.
I appreciate it. It's something, when I first walked in, and you've got this amazing booklet that you have that really goes into all the details of the fact of how you sort of integrate with the environment, the fact that you're not using chemicals, how you clean, how you help the local community, the bird watching. You mention all of that, so it's there's so much here. And I guess one of my first questions is, I think if I remember correctly, when you first came, it was just a grass paddock and coconut trees. Is that right?
Pretty much, yeah.
And now, for those of you who are watching on the YouTube, I'll be showing you some footage. This place is a lush, rich, biodiverse environment, almost rainforesty, just without too much. Like, it's got all the big trees, but it's the lushness of fruit trees and nut trees. You do an hour tour of the gardens, and everything is almost edible or has some kind of herbal essential oil kind of remedy. So and then, of course, something I mentioned to you, there's the detail of where the water flows. I mean, up here it rains a lot more. I think you said it's one of the highest rain areas in Bali.
It's true.
Something I noticed as a person who likes mechanics and things is that you've really managed the water, how the water flows here as well. So, how did you get started? Was there a progression of what you did first, like build a veggie garden first, or how did you sort of go about developing this amazing?
I think it's a really important point. Everything we've done, and most of the work I've ever done since we moved to Bali, and before for that matter, has been guided by my early studies in permaculture.
Okay.
Don't use the word a great deal because it's much misused. But I did several courses, and then we held courses here, and then I eventually got a diploma, and I take it really seriously. So one of the points with Bill Mollison was, ad hoc, bit by bit development of a property is not as productive, not as good in the end as if you make a plan. Think holistically about the whole thing and see how things interact with other things, and a bunch of basic principles that he gave us. So I think that's the first thing I'd say to anybody else is go and do a permaculture course and read the book, do a bit of study. The guy was a genius who gave us a gift that's right up there with other people who've gotten Nobel Prizes. So, for example, one of the things Bill said was, when you've got land, new land, stabilize it first. Make sure everything's stable. It's not eroding. It's not falling off in pieces. So that's one of the things you look at. How you place buildings has to do with permaculture stuff. Where you put gardens, how you structure gardens. One of the principles in permaculture is that we should look at an area and ask ourselves, what did nature have here before people came along? Because over time, nature will create the most productive ecosystem it can create in that environment. And so if we mimic that, we'll get something really productive. So in this case here, it was a rainforest. So ideally, you would recreate a rainforest, the structure of a rainforest, but with species that are beneficial for us. And so, as you said before, when we first got here, it was predominantly grass and coconuts, and an old man here used to move a cow or two around on the grass. Not sustainable, it's very steep here, and grassy slopes are erosive, they erode. Whether you see it or not, they're eroding. So over time, and it's not just us, the local people have worked out too that system wasn't the best. And so they've gone back. Sorry, I've got a hair in my mouth. I've got a dog hair in my mouth. They worked out that forest-like systems, food forests if you like, are more productive than the grass and cows. So it's not just us. And when you look around here, it looks like a jungle everywhere. But all of it's planted, it's all farmland, and everything we can see, with very few exceptions, is a tree that was put there for some benefit to humans. So in permaculture we call it stacking. You have production at many levels. So you have something, a root crop, might be cassava here, say, or sweet potato. And then you have something growing low, a ground cover of some kind. And then you have something a little bit bigger, a shrub, and then something a bit bigger like a small tree, and then a larger tree, and then an overstory like in a rainforest, which in this case would be the coconuts and the bigger trees. And that gives you a really productive system, which is what we have now. We've included in ours, I'm just looking out the window, I just noticed a native fig tree which wasn't planted, but we leave those, at least some of them, because they provide a bunch of food to birds and bats and so on. So you're right about the garden. When you walk around, most of it was put there because we can eat it. Some is for medicinal purposes. There's timber trees. Sometimes there's a legume just because they're good for soil fertility. And sometimes there's something that's just decorative because, it's nice to have some colour and whatnot. I don't know what else to say about that except that it's complicated. And the best possible thing I can say, rather than talk about individual issues, is go and do a permaculture course. Do it somewhere serious. Choose your place. Choose your teacher or teachers carefully, and take it seriously. Be a bit.
For those of you on a podcast, if you heard that, that's a dog sneezing.
It's Saskia.
Blessing Saskia.
Take it seriously. Learning to grow food is a lifetime thing. Gardening is a lifetime thing. You don't learn it overnight. You learn more all the time. And
you're learning it, not just the theory, but then actually getting out there and planting. That's where a lot of the big lessons.
Sure. And just in life, kind of slightly amuses me how city folks have to go to gyms and go jogging, because, you know, country folks don't do that stuff because they're too friggin' busy and too physical in their lives to consider that, you know, jumping on a, you know. So I think that's important. I think if people could get back a little bit more to getting their exercise by doing something useful like gardening, not a terrible thing at all.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly, that connection. And there's this just energy. When I arrived here a couple of days ago, my nervous system, I've got renovations happening next to me, and you just come and you, as soon as I got out of the car, in fact, G'day, my driver, he said, it's so quiet here. He lives in Guyana in Ubud. And he'd never been up here, and he was like, it's so quiet. And I know, and my nervous system was like, I can breathe. There's this true connection back to nature, and it's taken me a couple of days. You've seen me slowly unwind over the last couple of days, but that's what you've created, this nurturing, nourishing environment that allows people to connect back to that normal vibration of nature.
Thank you, but let's not give us too much credit. If anything, we've just created a place, you know, where people can come to. The place itself, the area, is the really magic bit. That's why I ended up here. I agree that it's healing. I think it's really good for people. And I think it's a good thing to come somewhere like this and work with the environment, work with the community, and then invite people in. I'll say this too, here's a point for maybe for younger people. When I was younger, I spent 10 years in tourism and service driving charter boats. I was a boat captain in the Whitsundays, mainly. And, you know, you sort of feel like driving boats around the Barrier Reef is a pretty fun business to be in. And it was for a while, but after a while it becomes really soul-destroying, like most tourism does. And so I swore after 10 years I wouldn't do it anymore. That's enough, you know. And yet here we find ourselves doing tourism, and there's a critical difference. Conventional tourism will eventually suck the life out of you. You know, it's really harsh on your soul, if you like. But the sort of people who come here are nice and interesting. I've sometimes joked, pardon me, that we should have a T-shirt printed that says arseholes don't go to eco lodges. Because it's kind of like that, you know. Nice people come here, so it doesn't create that same awful, I don't know, empty, hollow, frustrated, angry feeling, you know, of conventional tourism. Here people are nice, and you often feel like sitting down having a conversation. And we've never been the kind of place that would do anything to keep them. So, you know, if anybody was, say, rude to the staff, we just tell them to leave. Or, you know, if anybody's sort of going, oh my God, there's a spider in the bathroom, or just being too obnoxious, we just kind of say, it's not the right kind of place for you, you know, by all means, bugger off. And that takes a lot of pressure off you, you know, to always be smiling, to always be dealing with complaints and problems. So it doesn't happen. The number of times I've walked into the restaurant up here just to kind of say hello, and someone's jumped up and said, oh, you one of the owners here? I go, yeah. And they take my hand and say, thank you so much for making this place. Now, that doesn't happen in a conventional hotel. You know, they're not going to say thank you for making the hotel. But it happens here a lot. It's almost embarrassing. And I'd make this point too, because I'm really into the idea that we should try and inspire other... Could you stop for a second?
You're talking about how the tourism here is a bit different.
Look, I think it's a really big thing, and it probably applies to a bunch of different careers. You don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Conventional tourism, my view, is that working in conventional tourism is not fun. There's a limit. If you do this kind of tourism where care for the environment and respect for the local community is implicit, it's a very different thing. You can do this forever. I consider this sustainable, you know, intergenerational. Our boys are in the process of taking over. So that's an important point, I think, for people who've got any interest in working in tourism. You know, find somewhere beautiful and open an eco lodge. It's good for the environment, it's good for the local people, and it's an awesome lifestyle. in essence, what I sort of preach is that you can have your cake and eat it too. You know, we're living in paradise. People say that a lot, but I mean, look around, you know. I mean, you hear that a lot, but seriously, you know, where the people are super nice. It's Bali. And if I look around here now, I could just rattle off to you an enormous number of useful trees and plants that I can see from where I'm sitting here. Pretty much everything I can see here is edible or useful in some other way. So yeah, that's a big message. And I'd say health-wise, I know that's of some interest to you. One thing, being happy makes you healthier. You know, that's a given, I think. So that's a big part of it. We've been super fortunate in just living somewhere great, so we're happy a lot of the time.
Yeah.
It's hilly here, as you've already found out, so there's a lot of up and down.
Yep.
That's pretty good for you. Working in the garden's good for you. Play football with the kids is good for you. Breathing fresh air, having clean spring water. These things are all fundamental. Not having a lot of noise as a background stress. These things are all pretty fundamental. I'd say, you know, leaving the city and going to the country these things, they make a big difference to how you feel.
Yeah.
I'm 63, I still play football with the boys, you know. And I think it's a lot, it's all these things combined, it's not one thing.
Yeah.
You know, our diets are pretty healthy. Stress levels are pretty low compared to lots of people. Community's great. Yeah, so I can just so recommend to people that they consider changing lifestyles, or if you're not willing to leave the city, some cities are beautiful too. Where I come from, Sydney is a beautiful city with a decent climate. So, you know, get rid of the lawn and get in some gardens and start learning about that. Maybe instead of going to the gym, maybe go bushwalking.
Yeah.
You know, get back out in nature. I really worry for society with urbanisation that people, especially children, are not having time to connect with and be in nature. It makes a big difference to us. You know, we get pretty stressy, and the world of today we spend a lot of time on our computers, and young ones especially. I just worry that they're spending too much time in cyberland and not enough time in nature, forgetting what's really important. You know, we can turn the computers off and turn the internet off, and we still live.
Yeah.
But you know, we turn off the climate and the water supply, and too much contaminate the place and wipe out too many species. It won't matter about the computers, the internet. You know, we're buggered. So yeah.
Yeah. Something you said here about you eat really good food. That's one of the food here is so delicious, and we were talking about this earlier today, is because you're growing this beautiful, rich, organic veggies, and we get asked at breakfast time, what do we want for lunch, because they're going to go out into the garden and actually pick the fruits and veggies. And people who've listened to my podcast know that I talk about how the sooner that you eat the fruit or the vegetable that's been picked from the garden, the highest nutritional benefits it has.
Sure.
And so coming here, not just is it's a peaceful paradise, you're nourishing your organs through the vegetables and the gardens that you've been growing.
The food here, which we get a lot of raves about, goes entirely to Linda, my wife, and the ladies who work in the kitchen, who work this stuff out over the years, and also very much else. You mentioned our book, our information book in the rooms.
Oh, yes.
And you know, those of us who travel, we never read those things in the hotels. People here actually do read them.
Yeah, I've read it back to back.
There you go, thanks. And they often comment on it. And again, that goes down to Linda. You know, she's the one who's, in every case, made sure the details are nice and informative and just lovely. You know, she's the one who gets the credit for the decorating the places and keeping our standards up day to day. So, you know, it's very much a joint effort. I might build stuff, but she's the one who manages here. And working with the ladies on the meals, you know, it was an inspiration many years ago where she sort of went, hang on, it doesn't make any sense for us to be going up and down to Kuta, which is a couple of hours away, to get Western food to satisfy our guests. We should focus on Balinese food and just see what we can evolve with that. And that's pretty much how it's evolved. So as you said, they go to the gardens, they ask beforehand, what do you want for lunch? They go to the gardens, they get the stuff. And then Linda and the girls have just keep working together to come up with awesome stuff like the chocolate mousse and the salad crumble.
Mousse. I was just thinking about it.
It's cool, right? It's actually probably healthy for you. There's no dairy in it. It's got chocolate nibs from here and vanilla from here and stuff like that. So yeah, it's very much been Linda's baby, really, for all these years. And I sometimes joke when I come down the restaurant and people ask me questions and I say, look, I don't know, I'm just the pretty face around here. Apart from the pretty face thing, it's pretty true. Linda and the Balinese staff are the people who get the credit for so much of what you see here.
Yeah, well, the attention to detail is something that I definitely noticed. There's that feeling that everything's been thought of, even the lights down the path, the hooks in the bathroom. There's a lot of thing that's overlooked in a lot of places, but everything's thought of here.
We just really we travel a lot, usually. And, when we travel, if we find a place which feels like a little home for a day or two, of course, that's so much more memorable than just another friggin' hotel.
Yeah.
So each of the bungalows is a bit different, and each one should feel like our family, would be happy to come and stay here. So that's also something that we take seriously is, we want people to feel like they've got a little home for the time they're staying here, not just a unit that's been repeated a dozen times in a row. And again, much of the praise should go to Linda and the staff.
Well, that sort of brings me to a segue in regards to what you've done here. You've actually managed to bring the modern world that people are used to into the world that's thriving with nature. So one of those amazing examples is your natural pool that you've just built. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about this natural pool that is using how water works, but you've done it in a way so people aren't irked by mud or anything. Or can you talk a little bit about the natural pool?
Thank you. I'm super proud. I'm crazy proud about the pool. We just finished it before the lockdown, so mainly it's the family who's been enjoying it for these last few months. One thing I'll say is that my attitude has always been that we have to be able to find solutions to the issues that are mainstream acceptable, because those of us in the alternative movement, if you like, are already converted. We don't have to do any work there. What we need is, if we're going to save ourselves from ourselves, is to get mainstream acceptable solutions. We need to get the mainstream on side. So that applies to a bunch of things we've done over the years, but in terms of the pool, there's not a lot out there. There's no textbooks, and you do the YouTube thing, and you find that most of the natural pools that you see out there kind of look like a fish pond that you can swim in. Not really mainstream acceptable. So I figured there had to be a way to make a swimming pool that looks like a swimming pool and feels like a swimming pool, but doesn't have any chlorine or salt or anything else in it. So it was a little bit of a gamble. I've worked quite a lot with water before and studied on it. For anybody who's interested, there was a great German who figured out a bunch of important stuff about water. His name was Schauberger. So go and check out his work, Victor Schauberger, who's an inspiration for Steiner too. And so, based on experience and what I learned, we made the pool, and it's turned out to be an awesome success. It's really clear all the time. There are fish in there, but thank goodness, they hide in the wetland in the daytime, so you don't see much in the way of fish life during the day. Just those little guys you've probably noticed who come and give you the free foot spa. But at night, when we turn the lights on, then a whole bunch more fish come out. And there's frogs and tadpoles and little shrimp, all working to help keep the pool clean. We don't throw any food in there, it's a swimming pool. And what we're trying to do is reduce nutrients. So that's the big tip, by the way, for anybody who wants to try this. Filtering out particles is not too hard, but what we really need to do is keep the nutrient levels in the pool very, very low so that algae doesn't go crazy. When we see lakes with fish kills and rivers with fish kills, it's a nutrient problem. tied up with algae. So same with the pool, you don't want to have a lot of algae in there. And so reducing nutrients is the key, and having the little fish cleaning up what algae does grow, having plants in there sucking nutrients out of the water. It's a little ecosystem that's been designed to keep the water nice, like it was a creek or a pond. The input that you can't get away from is the power required to run the pumps. But apart from that, as you've seen, it feels like you're swimming in a creek. When you open your eyes, they don't sting, like you're in a creek. There's zero chemicals. We don't use any chemicals at all. And it's been running now for 4 months. And it's perfect. There's not much maintenance. So I'm now putting myself out there a bit to help people convert their existing swimming pools to that. And I would say, by the way, and I think this is important, for every aspect of life there are solutions along those lines, many of which are more accessible than a natural swimming pool. Pest control, heaps of solutions for that. Cleaning, heaps of solutions for that. Architecture and construction, heaps of things we can do to make our buildings more environmentally friendly and more comfortable, and healthier. For us, the idea that you would spray a pesticide around the place is just abhorrent. We're like, nah, it's nasty, And the same with cleaning products. We don't use stuff with strong chemical smells. We don't like the idea of trying to, you probably know all this stuff already, white vinegar, great, baking soda, great, a whole bunch of other things that we can do. This applies to managing your wastes, rubbish and composting and liquid waste, sewage and septic tanks and so on. We have, each of our bungalows here in the restaurant have its own dedicated wastewater garden. So we have a waterproof septic tank, and then the overflows go straight to a garden, and we grow food like bananas and papayas, rather than polluting the groundwaters or the rivers. And again, it's about getting the nutrients out. It's not a germ thing, and it's not a chemical thing here, but nutrients kill rivers and they kill lakes and they kill coral reefs. So this is a big deal. But there are solutions whereby, we have a pretty Western lifestyle in many ways. We've got a big flat screen TV and we watch football and stuff. We have internet and we all have computers and we travel and blah, blah, blah. But in each case, we try and find something that's more environmentally benign, and try and bring benefits. The idea is that you can't have a lifestyle that doesn't have some negative impacts on your environment. That's a dream. But what you can do is try and have sufficient positive, minimize the negatives, and have sufficient positive impacts on the environment, so that when you look at that life in balance, the balance is that you're bringing more benefits to the environment than you are hurting it in some way. And so overall, you can imagine a fantasy world where everybody's doing that. The world's getting better instead of getting worse. Of course, there's still going to be some negative impacts. We're using computers and they have some issues. Okay, we can also plant a bunch of trees and do a bunch of other things, provide habitat for nature and so on. That, push the balance the other way.
Well, that's what I like to talk about on Thriving with Nature. If we align with the force of nature, if you just look at nature, if we walk away, nature naturally regenerates. It's naturally thriving. So if you create an environment where you yourself is regenerating that area, in the overall balance of it all, then like you said, if each individual family unit are doing that, then this planet can turn around.
I think there's lots of examples in Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane in Australia. Something we see and take for granted a bit is bird life. A lot of bird life. You see cockatoos and kookaburras and lorikeets and whatnot flying around and flying to people's verandas to get food and generally enjoying life in the city. To people over here, that would be, it's hard to understand, oh my God, nobody's catching them or whatever. So that's something I think that can give us hope, is that if we just change our lifestyles, we can have an awful lot of habitat, an awful lot of nature can be invited back into the city or the town. And it's okay, your own garden. There might be, if you stop with all the chemicals and the nasty stuff, there can be lizards and beneficial insects and all sorts of things can live in your garden. And it makes life better. Kids love that stuff. When I grew up, we had a fairly big garden, and part of life was the things that were hanging out there in the garden. And a mulberry tree. I had a tree house in that I could eat mulberries and so on. So yeah, just kind of going back to a lot of that. You don't have to have such a radical switch as we made, but there's so many opportunities. I have to say this also, nature doesn't always, I kind of agree with you that nature will come back if we just stop hassling it and disturbing it. But there are other times, for example, in a rainforest here up the mountain, there's a few hectares that were cleared illegally many, many years ago in the 70s that never regenerated because there are vigorous imported vines that keep smothering the seedlings. So yeah, the forest keeps putting seedlings there, but they never get up because of these imported vines that are rampant. So you have these areas that are just covered in this imported vine and can't regenerate even over quite a long period. Give it hundreds of thousands of years maybe, but in our lifetimes. So years ago we got a project that was funded by a big bank where we went up there and cleared the vines and planted a whole bunch, thousands of native trees. And then when the bank had finished paying, we at the Eco Lodge kept paying a couple of local guys to go up there once a month and clear the vines off the seedlings, because if you don't do that, they're going to get smothered again. Once the trees got up to a point where they created a closed canopy and it was shady on the ground, the vines couldn't grow anymore and we could leave it alone. Now when we go back up in there, it's like a forest. It's actually kind of hard to find the spots that we replanted because it feels like the native forest.
That's amazing.
So there's a bit of both of those that, I agree with you that in many cases just leave it alone, it'll be okay. But where there's something that we've caused, like these vines, it requires intervention. It's okay to get out there and do a bit of help nature a bit come back. Plant trees and if I look around here, some of these things I'm looking at, that thing there creates thousands of berries, called Singapore berry, and we don't eat them. They're sweet and nice, but we don't. They're there for the birds and the bats. And this other thing down here is the same. And so, do that when you live in a city or a town. Put in some food and nature will come. If you're in Australia, keep your cat indoors at night. And so on, do things like that. It makes a huge difference.
It really does. It is. Well, I mean, I could talk to you for hours. I could talk to you for hours about all of this. I just want to say thank you. And for those of you who are listening or watching on YouTube, check out the link below, baliecolodge.com. And as soon as the planes are open, I would be booking. Just leave me a space because I'll be back regularly. It's a place where you can get reconnected and reminded about how humans can thrive with nature. So thank you so much, Norm, for being here on the podcast today.
Thanks, Haley. Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. So thank you, everyone, and have a beautiful day.
Peace.
Hey, if you enjoyed listening to my podcast, remember to subscribe to hear more. You also have to come check out the Living Supplement Garden, a garden that reads your individual's body's condition and grows the substances it requires to move towards optimal health and potentially healing your ailments. When we align with nature, we thrive with nature. I'd love to have you join myself and others as we discover the magic of nature together and strive to heal both ourselves and our planet. Go to thrivingwithnature.com.